Welcome to video number 8 in our 9-part series designed to help you prepare for the Salesforce Public Sector Solutions Accredited Professional Exam. In this video, we'll explore the next key focus area, which is data models and applications for emergency response management, also referred to as emergency program management. Let's get started. Today, we'll explore emergency response management, a powerful solution that helps public sector organizations efficiently prioritize and mobilize emergency services, ensuring communities return to well-being as quickly as possible. In this video, you'll learn how to set up and configure emergency response management, explore real-world use cases it supports, and understand its key benefits and added value. Whether you are gearing up for the PSS AP exam or simply want to deepen your understanding of the data model or implementation of emergency response management, this video will be valuable to you. I'll also walk you through some potential exam questions and highlight the critical areas to focus on during your exam preparation. Let's get into it. Alright, so today we'll first go over partner learning camp notes. This will be followed by a deep dive into the data models, which will include emergency response management and volunteer management. Unfortunately, there are not any childhood exercises available, so my recommendation will be to follow the help article notes and go over the important sessions, which we'll cover in this video as well. When we go over help article notes and the data models and POC notes, I'll also highlight the potential exam questions so you can be better prepared for the exam. So what exactly is emergency response management, also known as emergency program management? Well, it's a managed package and it allows government agencies to manage all types of emergencies like floods, wildfires, or even public health crises like pandemics. It provides emergency support services and allocate resources quickly. A key component of the emergency response or program management is volunteer management. It allows organizations to effectively coordinating and utilize volunteers during these emergency situations, which can accelerate their response to any emergencies. It's actually based on the application and LPI, which is License, Permit, and Inspection Data Model, with object names tailored to emergency response or program management. So if you are familiar with the application and LPI data model, emergency response or program management will be very easy to pick up because the data model is very similar. If it's been a while or you are new to application and LPI data model, I would recommend to check out episode 4 and 5 of the PSS series. I'll put the link in the description or comments below. In terms of exam content item, we'll be covering this particular item here, which is given business requirements related to managing an emergency response, identify the appropriate PSS components that can be configured and deployed to meet those requirements effectively. So the important things to cover, especially for the exam, are these items. We'll start from the top. First one is requirements and prerequisites for installing emergency response management, permission sets and licenses, data models, which will cover emergency response management and volunteer management, analytics for emergency response management, Salesforce maps, and Salesforce mobile. Let's now take a look at permission sets and licenses, which is quite important for the exam. So to enable users to work in the emergency response or program management, we'll need to assign them the necessary permission set licenses depending on what they need. So in emergency response management, there are 3 permission set licenses. First one here is public sector community. So you assign this license for site users that will need access to public sector data. We also have analytics for emergency program management. So this license will provide access to the CRM analytics template app built for emergency response for public sector and emergency response for public health. We also have emergency response for public sector. So this is the license that you need for emergency program management. So in emergency program management, there are special permission sets that give users access to features. There are 3 permission sets here. First one is action plans. So action plans, like we mentioned in the industry common layer video, which is episode 3, part 3 of the series, it provides users with access to action plans so they can create action plan templates and assign tasks related to service requests. We also have emergency response management permission set. So this one here provides internal users with access to emergency program management features such as approval of emergency requests and scheduling emergency service execution tasks. Over here we have industries visit. So this basically provides access to objects and features of industries visit. So we've covered licenses and permission sets for emergency program management. Now we'll talk about volunteer management. So when it comes to permission set licenses, there are 2 user groups. You have volunteers, which are your site users, and you have government employees, which are your internal Salesforce users. For volunteers, you'll need public sector for community permission set license. So that's the same as what we talked about here for emergency program management. For internal Salesforce users, you'll need emergency response for public sector permission set license. Again, this is the same with what we've covered here for emergency program management. So for the purpose of the exam, this is quite important to remember. Essentially, volunteer management and emergency response management, they share the same permission set licenses. When it comes to permission set, which we will assign to internal Salesforce users, you'll need the emergency response management permission set, which is the same as what we've just covered over here for emergency program management. So again, the permission set is the same to access volunteer management and emergency program management. So we've covered permission set licenses and permission set for volunteer management. We'll now go over how to actually set up your volunteers, which involves assigning user profile and user license. So for volunteers, which are your site users, to access to the information they need, they're going to need these, which are Customer Community Plus User License, ERM, which is Emergency Response Management, Customer Site Plus User Profile, and Public Sector for Community Permission Set License. Again, this is very important for the PSS exam. So what you need to remember is for site users, you need 1 profile and 2 licenses. An important setting that you will need to set up when you set up the profile is that you'll need to go into general user permissions, emergency requests. You'll need to provide access to public sector data for community users, which is mentioned over here. In terms of resources, I'll be providing these links in the description below or in the comments below. And if you are following the technical learning journey, what we are focusing on today is emergency program management. which is under the implementation readiness column. Alright, let's now cover the partner learning camp notes first. We'll go over the learning outcomes, followed by a deep dive into emergency response management. We'll then cover real case scenarios for emergency response management, and we'll also do a deep dive into volunteer management. Let's now go over learning outcomes. So for emergency response management, there are a few things that are quite important. We'll need to understand the benefits and the added value of this managed package, different types of use cases, some of the stakeholders in charge of implementing emergency response management, and also best practices and technical knowledge to configure this managed package. As mentioned earlier, emergency response management is also known as emergency program management. In simple terms, emergency response management is a Salesforce solution designed to help public sector organizations manage emergencies more effectively. As we know, emergencies can happen anytime and anywhere. Examples include natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, wildfires, and hurricanes. There can also be public safety issues including terrorism and other threats, and also public health crises like an infectious disease outbreak or a global pandemic. So emergency response management basically helps these government organizations to prioritize resources, mobilize emergency services, and keep communities informed during critical times. So during a crisis, coordination is key. Emergency response management helps government agencies to manage high-volume, multi-channel communications, track volunteer activities, and even provide real-time updates to constituents. So it's all about bringing communities back to well-being as quickly as possible, and it can include a variety of jobs, and also a lot of persona groups are often involved. And these groups include constituent and the government. From the constituent side, they are business owners, individuals, citizen and resident, and also volunteers. From the government side, you have reviewer or approver, caseworkers, dispatchers, managers, or supervisors. And here are some of the examples that the government agencies must do during a crisis. For example, keeping constituents informed with trusted information, manage high-volume multi-channel triage, minimize spread with contact tracing in cases of a pandemic, provide ongoing care for citizens impacted, manage emergency programs, support constituents with emergency services, including food or supply delivery, coordinate volunteers. Let's now talk about some of the key features that make emergency response management so powerful. So in terms of capabilities, emergency response management enables the government agencies to manage different types of emergencies, provide emergency support services, and allocate resources quickly. An important thing to know for the exam is that volunteer management is actually part of the emergency program management product. It plays a critical role as well in helping public sector organizations to speed up their response to any emergency, which actually increases the volunteer engagement and allows emergency services to execute effectively. Let's go over some of the key capabilities of emergency response management. So it can prioritize and mobilize resources faster because they are built-in collaboration tools, automated notifications, and workflow, which can speed up the requests, reviews, and approvals. It's able to support communities at scale. And the reason for that is because in Experience Cloud, you can set up an online self-service portal which can empower constituents to go on these websites to help the recruitment of volunteers to search, sign up for, and manage activities. It can also empower field response workers and volunteers. There's Salesforce Mobile that's built in that will support the planning, tracking, assignment, and execution of services all in a mobile device. Last but certainly not least, you can get a 360 view of the emergency request lifecycle. This allows increased collaboration between departments because you have a shared view of requests from the beginning, the intake stage, through to the last stage, which is resolution. Let's now go over an example use case of how a city can potentially use emergency response management to help constituents quickly recover from an emergency. So in this fictional city, Snacksboro, it's using Salesforce emergency response management to help its constituents to quickly recover from an emergency. And the way it does this is preparation. So the city is predicting a severe weather and flooding event for the upcoming week. The communication department uses emergency response management to send out mass updates across multi-channels, such as email, text, and social media to let everyone in the city know what are the safe places to stay, resources to gather, and places that are dangerous and they should avoid. The city also uses volunteer management capability in emergency response management to gather public sector employees and also volunteers. So they have set up a community portal to allow volunteers to access it in order to deliver sandbags and also helping the community to set up these sandbags and making sure the constituents are using these sandbags correctly. With Salesforce Mobile, each volunteer has access to emergency response management app on their mobile device where they can access their assigned tasks and update the status of these tasks. So public sector organizations can use OmniScript to customize guided flows in emergency response management. This is to make sure that the volunteers know what activities they should carry out and to sign off when they have completed certain tasks. From the city dispatchers and managers' view, they'll be using the emergency response management on the Salesforce platform. They'll be using this to review reports of the volunteer activities that have been completed. Over here, this is an example combined view of the case. There's different statuses, and underneath each status there are different case records. So this is where the preparation ends before the disaster hits. Now after a natural disaster has happened, this is what the city can do. So unfortunately, a small part of the city is impacted. Luckily, the city deploys a new community portal by using pre-built templates that's available as part of the emergency response management. This allows constituents to access the community portal from their mobile devices to see real-time crisis updates, and they are able to also submit requests for emergency services such as food delivery and clean water. So when these requests are submitted on the portal, you'll generate records in Salesforce. These records will then be reviewed by government approvers who will use emergency response management to review these applications for services and assess the eligibility of each of these constituents to receive benefits. These constituents can get notifications of their application status while the government approver coordinate with other departments to verify the information provided by the applicant and determine if the benefit can be granted to constituents. So in some scenarios, a caseworker will need to actually go out to be able to determine the eligibility. So they'll need to be on site to assess the situation to see the extent of damage from a flood. So in previous videos, we've gone over inspection management and how the inspector can use inspection management to guide their tasks and upload all case information from their mobile device. In a similar manner, in emergency response management, caseworkers can use similar capabilities in emergency response management managed package. So this solution helps caseworkers to make sure they've checked everything that's required, including things like taking and uploading pictures and taking notes on site. So after the constituent's application is approved, resources are allocated and volunteers or employees are assigned to carry out the request by using their emergency response mobile app. Let's now take a look at the objects and tools that power emergency response management. So as we can see here, this is public sector solutions, and in previous videos we've covered license and permit management, inspection management, and employee experience. Now we are looking into emergency response management. And here are some of the data models and objects and also industry common layers that power these applications. I won't go into details here as we have covered in previous videos on the public sector solutions industry common layer. So we'll only be looking at tools and objects that will be specific to emergency response management. So here, as we mentioned earlier, emergency response management is part of public sector solutions, and it includes capabilities that allow us to create a holistic experience to meet different customers' needs. Let's take a look at how emergency response management uses public sector solutions standard objects. So we have applications. So to request emergency services, you must first submit applications. So this application object will store information needed to actually start the process. You have inspections and visits. So in emergency response management, when public sector organizations need volunteers or employees to conduct things like site visits, they can use inspections and visits object to set up the structure needed to create a guided flow for task execution. If they need to conduct inspections, inspection management should be used. So again, we have covered applications, inspections, and visits in previous videos, so I would recommend you to check them out if it's been a while. Moving on, over here are more capabilities that support end-to-end processes for inspections. So you have emergency requests, volunteer management, visit mobile, and action plans. So emergency requests, this object basically allows you to store things like services, programs, and resources that constituents can request. Volunteer management, this component allows public sector organizations to gather, manage, and assign volunteers to execute these emergency requests. Visit mobile, so it's quite similar to how it's used in inspection management. Volunteers or public sector employees can use emergency response management on their mobile phones to complete their guided tasks and sign off when the tasks are completed. Action plans, this component gives the ability to create a template set of tasks that guide an inspection for an inspector through an assessment. Moving on, Over here we have OMI Studio components such as flexcards, OMI scripts, data mappers, and integration procedures. If you are not familiar with the OMI Studio components, I have an OMI Studio playlist that I will recommend you to check out. So in terms of flexcards, these are used to build UI components. OMI scripts are good for building applications forms. Data mappers are usually used in flexcards and OMI scripts. You can write data and extract data from Salesforce. Integration procedures, this can be used for light integration into Salesforce and also perform activities like extracting data and writing data to Salesforce. If you have a larger data integration requirement, then MuleSoft is the go-to application for this. So we've talked about a lot of data models and capabilities, and these are actually possible because of the public sector data model, which includes standard objects that are built in to address the needs of the public sector, specifically for emergency response management. And these capabilities are actually built on top of Service Cloud and Salesforce platform. So with emergency response management, you actually get all the key features and foundational capabilities of Salesforce. Now, to extend the capabilities even further, you can leverage partner ecosystems to fill in capability gaps where the standard solution falls short. So for example, you can get a third-party tool that can be integrated if volunteers need to access emergency response management offline during a site visit. There's also Salesforce Maps, so this is very useful when it comes to dispatching staff and volunteers. It helps them to identify geographical information and views. So this can also be replaced with a third-party tool as well. So for example, a third-party tool might allow dispatchers to draw exact location on the map that needs emergency services. One important thing with emergency response management is communication. So apart from the community sites for constituents to request services, there are also contact centers that allow people to call for more guidance from public sector organizations. There are virtual agents or chatbots with automated processes which can increase the self-service efficiency. So for example, someone can call up about a particular application to check the status and how it's progressing. There are other channels such as emails and text messages which can increase communication between constituents and the government. Over here, you'll notice there's Tableau CRM for public sector. So what this solution provides is that it allows you to access to funding and operation trends, ability to measure the impact of services, and ability to take action with intelligent insights. So basically, Tableau CRM allows you to have the ability to see through the data and also be able to get the insights that you don't necessarily get from the standard reports and dashboards. Alright, let's go through emergency response management demo. So in this managed package, there are pre-built templates available which can be set up quickly and have this running in a short amount of time. These pre-built templates allow constituents to see different types of requests based on different programs that's been set up. For example, here you can submit your emergency request, you can make a donation, you can request different resources such as donating emergency supplies, request resources for business or for individuals and families. There are other resources like food and essentials, senior well-being, consumer, employee, protection. So to make a request, you would click on this Submit a Request button. And when this is clicked, you'll launch an OmniScript form. So on this form, it contains different questions relating to the emergency assistance request. So you can specify the requested service and the reason why you need this emergency assistance, provide additional details, and also the date required. When you go to Next and complete all the forms, this form will be submitted. When the form is submitted, in the background, you'll create cases and a few different objects as well, which we'll go over shortly. So when the case is created, you'll come into the Salesforce platform. The case managers can go to the emergency response app and be able to see in a combined view of each of the cases and their associated stages. In addition to case record, when the application form is submitted on Experience Cloud site, an individual application record will also be created. So this record will contain an ID, a case, the associated person account, emergency service type, and other details such as the application status. You can also see the application status in the status bar here as well, and at the moment it's set to scheduled. On the panel here, you can also see the approval history as well. Also on the related list here for the individual application, there are visits and emergency requests. So visits are for applications where it requires an on-site visit to assess the impact of the damage, for example. And here we have the emergency requests, which we'll go over now. This emergency request will contain the actual request details that's submitted on the form. So things like request reason, requested service, as we can see these questions over here, requested service, requested reason. And there are also details that it tracks and date required. It also records the email, the person account, and basic details such as phone and delivery address. Let's go back to the individual application itself. And you might ask the question why you need both individual application and emergency request in this case. So the reason for that is because individual applications allows you to track status out of the box, and it acts as a container to track application related details such as approval history. Over here for emergency request, this is only for emergency response managed package. So this is an extension to the individual application where it stores specific details about the emergency request, and these details often come from the application form that's on the Experience Cloud. So here is an example record of approval request. Here you can see the associated application ID. So this is the individual application that we looked at earlier, which is this over here. And at the moment we are looking at this particular approval history record. We can see the emergency service type, application status, and the applied date. And you can see the actual approver and who it's assigned to. And at the moment it's assigned to the emergency scheduler queue. So what that means is that it's sitting in the queue at the moment and it hasn't been assigned to anyone. So that's why it's still saying pending. So once this has gone for approval, it goes for scheduling. And this is where Salesforce maps come in handy. So as you can see here, we have these green dots on the map. So these are all the emergency requests. So at the moment, there are 13 requests, and there's geocodes as well. So once completed, and there's one bad address. On Salesforce maps, you can also see different layers, and these layers actually help you to select multiple emergency requests, and you can perform mass actions and add all of them to schedule at the same time. So once you've added these emergency requests to schedule, to actually schedule these requests, you can go to the Schedule tab. Once on this tab, you can see a list of scheduled requests. And to schedule a request, simply select a request and drag and drop to the time slot that you want to schedule this request for. So if we want to schedule number 14, we'll select this and put it on the calendar on the left. And now it's scheduled from 9:45 to 10:15. So once these requests are scheduled, we need to send volunteers or staff to deliver or help out with the emergency request. This is where Salesforce Mobile comes in. On Salesforce Mobile, you are able to access Emergency Response Console. In this app, you are able to see a Google map with all the schedule requests for today, the details, and also the address and the time as well. And once the emergency request is complete, the volunteer or staff can go to these visits and update the status to complete. Let's now talk about volunteer management. So this is a key part of the emergency response management package. We'll talk about how to set this up on the Salesforce platform first, and then we'll go over what this looks like on the Community Cloud or Experience Cloud. So to set volunteer management up, you'll first need to create volunteer project records. So for example, blood donation campaign, delivery food campaign. So let's take blood donation campaign for example. So we'll create a record for blood donation campaign. In this volunteer project record, you'll enter details such as name, in this case, blood donation campaign, the location, start time, end time, the internal description, and the description and key responsibilities. So in this case, internal description is more for the internal users, and here it gives the example, provide excellent and enthusiastic customer service to enhance the blood donor experience. And here it provides the description of this campaign and also some of the key responsibilities, such as explain purpose of temperature screen to donors and ensure they understand reason for deferral if applicable. So these responsibilities are more for the volunteers to read, and the description here is more for the volunteers to get a quick overview of what this campaign is about. You'll also notice there's a field code published to community, so this flag can be used to manage if the volunteer project is visible or not on the community portal. Over here you can see the volunteer project location here and also the surrounding roads and shops. And in here, this is the standard activity panel. You also have this volunteer shifts panel as well, which allow you to organize different people on different shifts. So volunteer projects requires volunteers, otherwise it won't be able to run. So how do you actually assign volunteers? You'll need to go to a list of contacts, and here you'll have your community users. So these are the volunteers that have signed up, and you can select one or multiple. You can assign them to volunteer project. When you click on this button, it's going to ask you to select which volunteer project you want to assign the contact to and the shift status, whether it's tentative, planned, or in progress. Once this person has been assigned to a volunteer project, you can go to this person's personal account and the shift record will appear. The shift record will include details as to what volunteer project the person is associated with, the status, and the start time. In this person account, you can also see the account name, title, in this case the accountant, phone number, email, and whether this person is a community user or not, and also the owner of this volunteer's person account. Now that we understand how things work and configured on the Salesforce side, let's go to the community experience for volunteer. So similar to the Experience Cloud site for emergency response management, this is the Experience Cloud site for volunteer projects or volunteer management. These two can actually coexist. Emergency response management and volunteer management then can be on the same page, or it can be on separate portals. It depends on the use cases and whether there is a need for volunteers to assist for the emergency that the organization is dealing with. So as a community user, if I want to volunteer some of my time, I will go to this volunteer projects tile. Once I'm in there, I'll see a list of available volunteer projects with the name. So we were looking at setting up blood donation campaign earlier, and here are the location, start and time description. So all of these fields, we have configured them earlier in this record here. So for example, if the volunteer is interested in the blood donation campaign, they can click on the drop down arrow and read more about what this campaign is about. So once you are in here, you'll be able to see this page over here. So this is very similar to how it was set up inside Salesforce, but with fields that are applicable to the volunteers. So as a volunteer, if I have signed up to multiple volunteer projects, I probably want to have a place where I can view a list of my commitments. So if you go to the Experience Cloud site for volunteer management, there's a tab here called Volunteer Projects, and here you can look at all your volunteer shifts. So when you are on this page, you can see a list view for your volunteer shifts, details of each commitment or volunteer project, start and time, location, and the status. And with these volunteer shifts records, the volunteer actually has access to these records and they can edit them. So when they click on the drop down and go to the record, they'll be able to see more details about the volunteer project and the associated volunteer shift that they've been assigned to. So in this example, it's blood donation campaign. You can see the start and time. There's the location and driving directions as well. And here is a section about participation information. And this is where the volunteer can update the record directly from the community site, and also upload files as well. So as an internal employee for a government agency, I'll be quite interested in the number of volunteers that are registered for volunteer projects, and this is where you can go to this emergency response app, and in here it has volunteer information, and this will be updated automatically. So in here I can see volunteers requested, volunteers registered, and volunteers still needed. And as an internal user or someone that's managing the volunteers, I can also see the volunteer shift records by clicking on this tab here, like we talked about earlier. So we can see this volunteer Andrew, his status is tentative, and the expected end time as well. Before we go into data models and doing a deep dive, let's do a quick summary of the emergency response management package. So in summary, emergency response management provides a lot of solutions in this one package. It provides communication management, response management, emergency funds management, health and recovery management, quarantine management, and readiness management. And these out-of-the-box solutions mean that Salesforce can be provisioned within minutes and configured for particular emergency response mission within a few hours to a few days. So when it comes to emergencies, data and information is very important. So Salesforce has Einstein Analytics, and this enables organizations to quickly analyze key performance areas of their readiness and share the analysis and act upon these analyzed data. When it comes to communications management, it's critical during emergencies, and Salesforce offers a very good communication platform that can be used to provide mass and personalized communications via multiple channels such as emails, text, and social media. It also has the capability to manage quarantines and displacement. So when there is a public health emergency, there is being evidence that when you quarantine individuals, it's a key step in preventing the spread of disease. So the platform allows you to get this 360-degree view of your quarantine management, and you can get geospatial information, case management details, timelines, contacts, and milestones. So this allows the case managers to manage and check all details related to the quarantine individuals, including personal information, location, status, engagement history, questionnaires, updates, treatment plans, and a lot more. Because Salesforce can deliver integrated set of capabilities that can connect different parts of the process together, it allows you to have a centralized view of what is going on, and this is very helpful in emergency situations, especially when it comes to coordination and reporting. After the emergency or during the emergency, there will be unfortunate situations where individuals can get sick or injured, and this is where it's important to have health and recovery management, and this is where it's important to have a consistent care plan, protocols, and checking mechanisms for patient interactions. And Salesforce Health Cloud offers organizations the ability to manage patient care and interaction. For example, over here you can see various different appointments for clinical data. There is also live events as well to do with quarantines and testing for COVID, and there's engagement details as well. When it comes to emergencies, it's quite important to have emergency grants and loans to help crisis response, relief, and reformation efforts. So Salesforce as a platform also has the ability to track these funding, allowing citizens that require funding to apply, and having a centralized location and the use of self-service portal to apply for grants, it means that everything will come into the Salesforce platform, and the team will have a 360-degree view of these applications. And what this means is that it allows all the information to be captured, and also improves the processing time and approvals. Alright, let's now take a look into the data models. We'll first cover off core emergency response management data model. This will be followed by inspection, violation, and enforcement data model associated with emergency response management package. And we'll also go over volunteer management data model as well. Now let's take a look at core emergency response management data model. So here, what you can see is the white ones, things like cases, visit accounts. These are core entities, but not necessarily part of the emergency response management. The purple ones here, like emergency request, public sector organization, emergency service execution type. These are key entities added for emergency response management. One thing that's quite important, especially for the exam, is that you'll need to enable person accounts to be able to use emergency response management. We'll cover the details on how to set up emergency response management before you can use it shortly after we cover off the data model details. You'll also notice that there are brackets in some of the objects. So these are the emergency response management equivalent to a standard PSS object. So for example, you have regulatory authority. So this is a standard PSS object. And the emergency response management equivalent object is public sector organization. When you look through these data models in detail, what you'll find is that there's a lot of similarities between emergency response management and license and permit management or inspection management. And it also uses some of the data models from industry common layer like action plans. So I highly recommend you revisit these videos in the PSS playlist. I'll include link down below to get you to familiarize with how these objects work. It'll help you understand the emergency response management data model a lot better and quicker. So to help you better understand and relate to the PSS standard object from emergency response management object, I've color-coded my notes. Purple ones are emergency response management object, and red ones are the PSS standard object equivalent. Now let's break this data model down. We'll start with three fundamental object records that are created when a citizen or business submits a request through the emergency response management community portal. So you have applications, and this can be individual or business applications. You also create a record for case and also emergency request. Now let's break them down in detail. First, we'll talk about applications. So there are two types, individual application or business application. In the PSS standard object world, business application is called business license application. Let's start with individual application. So these are designed for citizens and residents seeking emergency assistance. They can handle disaster relief applications. Add requests can be financial, medical, shelter, food assistance, etc. It can be emergency permits and certifications for first responders and medical staff or volunteers to apply for temporary credentials. So we can use the individual application object to track eligibility and status of the relief requests or emergency requests. There is also out-of-the-box functionalities for automated approvals, and this is critical in crisis zones where it requires fast deployment of resources or emergency permits and certifications. Business application. In PSS standard object, the equivalent is business license application. So these are tailored for organizations or businesses or commercial entities managing emergency operations, and it can cover emergency business permits, which allows essential businesses like healthcare, logistics, construction to operate during crisis. It can also be temporary licenses for disaster recovery team or post-disaster reopening permits. And again, some of the advantages for using business application is out-of-the-box approval processes and also the ability to use inspection management and approvals for business continuity. So inspection management and approvals, this applies to individual applications as well. Now that we have covered the application objects, let's take a look at the case object. So with cases, it's used to keep track of communications with citizens or businesses. So for example, customer issues, inquiries, or incidents. It's a central place for all customer support interactions. So it allows the team to manage the entire life cycle of a customer service request from the initial contact to resolution. Now let's take a look at emergency request. So just going back to the data model. So what you can see here is there is this one-to-many emergency request relationship. So an application can have multiple emergency requests. So emergency requests are submitted by citizens or businesses for emergency assistance using the emergency response site. So this is used to track and manage urgent assistance requests from individuals or businesses during a crisis. It's basically a central record for managing emergency needs and coordinating response efforts. This object record will contain a lot of details, such as request service, for example, food delivery, reason for the request, and request details. So when you look at the object model that we had a look at earlier, it's linked to either individual application or business application, which are used for approval processes and checking for compliance and eligibility verification. Now that we've covered these objects in emergency response management, we'll now go over the next three key objects, which are emergency service authorization, emergency service type, and emergency service execution type. The PSS equivalent standard objects are business license, regulatory authorization type, and inspection type. Let's take a look at emergency service type. If you recall from previous license, permit, and inspection management video, you will know that regulatory authorization type, it's basically licenses and permits that the regulatory authority can grant. So for example, hairdresser license. If we were to have a look at the object data model here, we just talked about the regulatory authorization type, and what you can see here is that there is a one-to-many relationship between regulatory authority and regulatory authorization type. So in the hairdresser license, which is a regulatory authorization type, the associated regulatory authority can be hairdresser governing body. So how it works in emergency response management, it's quite similar. So the equivalent is emergency service type. It's basically type of emergency services your agency or other agencies, so these are public sector organization record, they can offer. So for example, temporary housing requests or resource delivery. And if we look at the data model over here, for the example where we talked about emergency housing request, which is emergency service type, the authority that can grant this, which is a public sector organization, can be Department of Housing, which has the ability to grant temporary housing for residents that are impacted during a crisis. Alright, let's take a look at the next object, Emergency Service Authorization. The PSS standard object equivalent is business license. So business license represents an authorization issued by a regulatory authority. The authorization can be granted to an organization or a person. For example, license to operate a restaurant. Now let's go back to the data model to have a look. So as we can see here, business license can be granted to an account. This can be a business account or a personal account. You can also see that there is a lookup relationship between the applications and business license. So what this allows you to do is that, for example, if the application is approved, you can have automation in the background to create the associated business license record and attach this to the application. It's also related to regulatory authorization type. So this allows you to check how many licenses you have issued under a regulatory authorization type. So for example, the regulatory authorization type can be hairdresser license, and under this you'll be able to see all the business licenses that you have issued to individuals or accounts for this particular regulatory authorization type. So as mentioned earlier, we have covered this in a much greater detail in license, permit, and management videos. So if you need a recap, I'll recommend you to check that out. So we have just covered business license. The emergency response management equivalent is emergency service authorization. So this is basically for the use of authorizations to approve specific types of applications, such as for recurring financial assistance payments or allocation of equipment and supplies. So it's basically the business license to use these emergency services. So as a quick example, the account can be a restaurant that's been impacted by a cyclone, and the emergency service authorization can be recurring financial assistance for the next 6 months to support the operation of the restaurant during cyclone. Next object, we have emergency service execution type. The PSS standard object equivalent is inspection type. So look at the inspection type first. So it basically represents the type of inspections related to a permit or license. So for example, food safety inspection. So we are looking at inspection type here. Again, we have covered this in good detail in the previous videos on license and permit management, so I'll only be quickly covering the basics here. So I'll recommend you to check those videos out if you require more details. So going back to the hairdresser example, you can have multiple inspection types as indicated by this one-to-many relationship. So the regulatory authorization type can be hairdresser license, and the inspection type can be fire safety inspection or health and safety inspection. The inspection type object is also associated with visit record. So lots of inspections require a person to be out on site and go over a set of tasks or checklist items to be able to verify if the restaurant or the organization meets the standards. So coming back to emergency service execution type, which is the emergency response management equivalent of inspection type, this object displays a type of emergency service. For example, food and water delivery. So we'll use food delivery as an example as emergency service execution type. So earlier we talked about emergency service type, and if we go back to the notes, an example of emergency service type can be resource delivery. So over here, back to the data model, the emergency service type is resource delivery, and there can be multiple emergency service execution type. It can be baby food or food for elderly if you have elderlies in the house. It can be water as well. The emergency service execution type is also associated with the visit record. Now, the visit record here will be used to contain a list of items that will be required to actually deliver food or water, and it will contain a list of items on the action plan, so things like how to actually access the building if it's flooded, or how much food you need, and etc. Now that we have covered all the key objects, we'll go through this as a whole. So we'll provide an example that would go from start to end and also cover some of these objects that haven't been covered in this end-to-end example. Alright, so the scenario here is that person A has been impacted by a cyclone and it's requesting for some sort of resource support to get food and water delivered. So this person would first go on to the emergency response management community portal. It will submit a request. Once the request is submitted, it's going to generate 3 records on the Salesforce platform. You'll generate a case, an individual application, and an emergency request. This individual application will be associated with emergency service type. So in this case, it will be resource delivery. So emergency service type, it's basically type of emergency services the public sector organization can offer. So for example, resource delivery, the public sector organization, they can offer this resource delivery service can be the local city council. And as we talked about earlier, the emergency service execution type can be food delivery for babies, water, and food delivery for elderlies. Now, this application will be associated with a visit record, and this record will be linked to, for example, water delivery. This visit record will have details such as how the water will be delivered to the house. If the house is in an affected area, there might be certain checklists for the delivery person to ensure health and safety, and to ensure that, for example, the water is not expired, and all of this will be covered in the action plan data model, which we have covered in the Public Sector Solutions Industry Common Layer video. So I won't go into too much details here. Let's now look at business type and business regulatory authorization type first. So we'll give a quick overview of what these two PSS standard objects are doing. Then we'll talk about the emergency response management equivalent, which is business emergency service type. And business type object is common across the PSS standard object and emergency response management object. Let's take a look at the business type object first. So business type is the type of business that the application is associated with. So let's use business application as an example. So if a business owner is applying to open a hair salon, the business type will be hair salon. And you'll notice that this business regulatory authorization type, this is a junction object between business type and regulatory authorization type. So what this object is doing here is that it basically shows a list of licenses and permits, which are basically regulatory authorization type records that a particular business type requires. So for example, for the hair salon, you'll require fire permit and health and safety certificate. So when you view the business regulatory authorization type record, you will see the associated regulatory authorization type records such as fire permit and health and safety certificate. So again, I've covered this in much greater detail in the license, permit, and inspection videos, so I recommend you to check that out. So I won't cover in too much detail here. Now that we have an understanding of how the standard PSS is using these objects, let's talk about how emergency response management are using these objects here. So we'll carry on from the hair salon example. So unfortunately, a cyclone has hit in the area. The salon owner, as a result, has to close the business. So the salon owner will need to support the income, and they'll need to apply for financial assistance. So this owner goes on the website and apply for a request on the emergency response management portal. And because this is applying for a business, it's going to create business application record in the background, as well as emergency request and cases, like we mentioned earlier. So this hair salon again will be the same business type, which is hair salon. Now the difference is that we have business emergency service type object and emergency service type. Because the cafe owner is applying for financial assistance, the emergency service type will be recurring financial service request. And this can probably be granted by Department of Emergency or the local council. So in standard PSS object model, we talked about how business regulatory authorization type is a junction object that shows a list of licenses and permits that a particular business type requires. Now, in a similar way, in emergency response management, this is used to show what regulatory authorization type a business type can apply for. So in the case of the hair salon, the business type is hair salon, and type of emergency service type the business can apply for can be recurring financial permit, cleaning service due to the cyclone, and free health and safety inspection. So this business emergency service type record is able to track this many-to-many relationship here. So when you look at a business type, you can look at a list of emergency service type that is applicable for this particular business type. And this is quite important for the case managers that are looking after these emergency applications. the case manager will be able to know what emergency service type are applicable to a particular business type. And this is quite important, especially when it comes to reviewing applications from different business types. For example, in a healthcare facility, it makes sense for a healthcare facility to be requesting for personal protective equipment as a regulatory authorization type. But in case of hair salon, it does not make sense to be asking for a personal protective equipment. And because we have this business emergency service type object, we are able to keep track of this many-to-many relationship between business type and emergency service type. So for example, if I'm the case manager reviewing an application for a hair salon asking for personal protective equipment, I'll look at the business type record, which is hair salon, and I'll be able to see a list of required regulatory authorization type and see if personal protective equipment is there. And if it's not, then I can reject this application. Now that we've also covered this, let's take a very quick look at regulatory authorization type product or emergency service type product. So basically, this is a junction object which is tied to product. So it's catalog of products that's associated with the type of services or emergency services that you provide. Now let's take a look at the inspection, violation, and enforcement data model. As mentioned earlier, the inspection, violation, and enforcement data model, a lot of this relies on the inspection and permit management and also action plan and visits. And we have covered this in great detail in previous videos, so I won't be going into a lot of details here. So we talked about business license previously in the core ERM entities over here, which is emergency service authorization in the emergency response management package. So we'll dive a little bit deeper now. So emergency service authorization or business license in standard PSS world. Some permits will also be time-based, and this is where authorized location access schedule object comes in. So for example, you can only access the building on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, and you notice how there is this one-to-many relationship that allows you to associate this authorization application place with multiple time slots. Earlier we talked about visits, how it's related to the emergency service execution type. So visit, again, it's used to record the details on how you can deliver emergency goods and services to individuals, and these details will be recorded usually in an action plan or set of tasks. And these tasks will be using these assessment indicators and associated objects to be able to form the assessment task checklists. And over here, it also includes regulatory codes and violation types, which we have covered in previous videos already, so I won't dive too much deeper here. And if you are preparing for the PSS AP exam, I wouldn't worry too much about these in the context of emergency response management, as most of these objects will be tested under license inspection management. Alright, now let's take a look at volunteer management data model. So here is the data model for volunteer management. And notice that one of the relationship here is included in the emergency response management package. We'll go over the details of this shortly. The way we'll look into this in detail is that we'll start with each individual objects, and then we'll cover the key relationships between some of these objects. So let's start first with the volunteer project object. So the volunteer project object basically represents a high-level project that volunteers can participate in. So for example, a street cleanup or food distribution program. So what this looks like in Salesforce is that here we have a volunteer projects list view. We have internal description, status, location, and volunteers required. And here are just a few examples. For example, delivery food supplies, blood donation campaign, prepare donated medical supplies. And when you look into one of these volunteer project records, you'll see these details. And on the right panel here, you can see the volunteer shift related list as well, which we'll cover next. And this related list, if we go back to the object model, is this object right here. Let's now have a look at this shift object. So as we know, a volunteer project often requires multiple shifts. So each shift is a scheduled time slot for volunteers to participate. So for example, a food distribution program might have morning and afternoon shifts on the same day. And if we look at the shift related list record here, we can see multiple shifts over here as well. And when we look at what's on the community site, this shows the key information on the volunteer shift, such as volunteer project details, start time, end time, driving direction, location, and there's details about the participant as well. Moving on, let's take a look at service resource. This is quite an important object, especially for the exam, so make sure you remember what this object is for. So service resource basically refers to an individual volunteer who can be assigned to specific volunteer projects. So they are essentially acting as available workforce that can be scheduled for different volunteer opportunities within the organization. So in simple terms, it basically represents a volunteer. Each volunteer is connected to their availability and assignments through this object here. So this can include fields like resource type, such as technician, dispatcher, planner, etc. Active, whether the volunteer resource is active or not. Location, work hours, and availability. Let's now look at account, contact, and user objects. So volunteers are modeled as person account. For those that are not familiar with person accounts, it's basically a special type of account record that combines information from both an account and a contact, allowing users to store personal details about an individual directly within the account record. The contact object here connects to the user profile, which is then associated with service resource, which we'll cover shortly. And the information on contact will be available on the person account record as well. Now let's take a look at this service resource object. For those that are doing the exam, this is quite a key object to understand. So this object basically represents a volunteer's availability and capability. It refers to an individual volunteer who can be assigned to a specific volunteer project, essentially acting as available workforce that can be scheduled for different volunteer opportunities within the organization. So each volunteer, which is a person account, connects to the service resource object to reflect their availability and assignment. Now that we understand all the objects well, let's go over the key relationships. So again, we'll start with the volunteer object. So there is this one-to-many relationship here. What this means is that each volunteer project can have many shifts. So whether that's morning, afternoon, or night shifts. And shifts are linked to service resource, which represents available workforce or a volunteer availability, allowing you to assign volunteers to specific time slots. The service resource then ties back to account, which is a person account, and also the user. Now let's look at this relationship here, which is only included in the emergency response management package. So that's quite important for the exam as well. So this relationship here, one-to-many relationship between account and shift, basically allows you to link volunteers, which are person accounts, directly to specific shifts. And it makes it a lot easier to track which volunteers are assigned to which shifts, and helps you to manage capacity limits. Without this relationship here, it would be difficult to track which volunteers are assigned to which shifts, and also it won't be very easy to figure out how many shifts a volunteer is associated with. So having this data makes assignment very easy. To assign a volunteer to a project, you would find the associated context and click on the person or people that you want to assign to a volunteer project. Once you click on the button, this window will show up, and you can select the volunteer project you want to assign the volunteer to or volunteers. And once that's complete, on your person account, you'll be able to see a shift record here. Now let's look at the help article notes. So 3 important sections from the PSS documentation. First one is how to actually install emergency response and program management package. Very important for the exam. And also a list of pre-configured flows and how to deploy analytics for emergency program management, which is also super important for the exam. And we have covered this in detail in the industry common layer video, but we will cover quickly here again for revision. So how do you install emergency response or program management package? As we know, emergency response or program management is a managed package. Before you install the package, there are 3 things you have to do. First is you have to enable person accounts. This is because this managed package uses individual application object, which requires person account to be enabled. Before installing the package, you also need to assign these 2 permission sets to system admin user. First one is emergency response management. Second one is action plans. You also need to ensure Experience Cloud is enabled, and this can be done by going to Setup, Enable Digital Experiences. To install the package, you can navigate to this link here, which I'll highly recommend to install and have a play around to help you understand this package a lot better. I'll include the link in the description or comments below. And a lot of you will realize that while going through this video, it's based on the application and license permit inspection data model with object names tailored to emergency response or program management. Let's look at the pre-configured flows that are available. So in emergency program management, there are basic flows that you'll need to be able to get some of your processes up and running, and these pre-configured flows will help you to create these processes a lot quicker. So there's a flow that creates a visit for an emergency request event. There's a flow for emergency assistance, emergency supplies donation, emergency supplies request, location access permit, requesting a training certificate, and requesting an open permit. So all of these are quite important depending on the nature of the emergency. So the key thing to remember here for the exam is that there are pre-configured flows set up here. So a lot of the processes, you have a flow that you can clone and modify to suit the needs of your business requirements. Alright, next one is analytics for emergency program management. As we mentioned earlier, we have covered this in detail in the industry common layer video, so I'll encourage you to check that out. So for analytics for emergency program management, what it allows the organization to do is to identify the hotspots in which the requests for emergency services are increasing so that you can allocate resources to where they are needed the most. So this emergency request overview dashboard is part of Tableau Analytics or CRM Analytics for public sector. This dashboard allows you to identify the areas that are requesting assistance and see what type of requests they are making. You can also view the trends by area to see which locations have the most requests or are increasing in the number of requests. In addition to the emergency requests overview dashboard, there is also the visits dashboard as well. So this dashboard allows you to manage the delivery of emergency services by gaining insights into the total number of visits your agency has completed over time. Now, what we're about to cover is critical for the exam. So this section is about the data needed to create the analytics for emergency program management app. So to be able to create the dashboards that we've just talked about, you will need to meet specific data requirements before you can do that. So your org must have an account record, a lead record for emergency management for public health only. So if you are not dealing with public health emergencies, you don't need the lead record in here. You must have one emergency request and one individual application. So while you are creating the app in CRM Analytics for public sector or Tableau Analytics, if your org doesn't meet the minimum requirements, you will see a message describing what data is missing and how to fix it. Another thing that's really critical for the exam is setting up the user profile access. So you'll need to set field level security to enable creation of the analytics for emergency program management app. So before you create the analytics for emergency program management app, make sure that the analytics cloud integration user profile has access to all fields in the app. This is to ensure that when you are running CRM Analytics for the emergency program management app, while it's rendering the dashboard, this particular user profile have access to all the data, so all the data is displayed properly on the dashboards that we talked about here. So how do you actually create an app from the Analytics for Emergency Response template? All you have to do is you'll need to first navigate to Analytics Studio, click on Create, then select App, and create app from the template. And here you should be able to see Analytics for Emergency Program Management, and click on Continue. Once you have a look at the preview page and click on Continue, you'll be able to see the configuration wizard. And if you want to create an app or use settings from an existing application, you can make a selection and click Continue. Then CRM Analytics will perform a compatibility check of your orgs data. So that's what we've talked about earlier. So if it discovers that there's missing data, you'll see error messages with instructions about how to address them. Once you fix the issues, you can try app creation again. If it completes successfully, you can click on Look Good Next button. If you have emergency program management app for public health, then the next page of the wizards will ask you to make one selection. The first wizard question asks if you would like to address the dashboards for public health overview. If you choose yes, then it will be getting this public health overview dashboard instead. And here is a template. Here is how what you will see when you are creating an app. And in this case, you can see one of the templates is Analytics for Emergency Response Management, and that's what we are seeing here on step number 4. And that's it. That's all the important sections in the help article that you need to know for the exam. And that concludes part 8 of our Public Sector Solutions series. In the next video and the final video of this exam preparation series, we'll dive into security and PSS best practices. I'll cover essential topics such as permission sets, licenses, experience cloud templates and licensing, sharing models, and security tools. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps others discover free Salesforce study resources and encourages me to keep creating valuable content for our community. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.